The November wind howled across the vast expanse of the Thunder Ridge Ranch in northern Arizona, carrying with it the bitter cold of an early winter storm that had been battering the high desert for 3 days. Lightning split the black sky as rancher Mike Carson made his final rounds of the evening, checking on the cattle and horses that had taken shelter in the barns scattered across his 1,500-acre spread. At 53, Mike had the weathered appearance of a man who'd spent his entire adult life working under the unforgiving Arizona sun. But tonight his face was etched with a wariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. It had been exactly 1 year since his wife Emma had died in a car accident on the treacherous mountain road leading into the small town of Sage Creek. And Mike was still struggling to find meaning in a life that felt hollow without her presence. Emma had been everything to Mike, his partner, his best friend, his reason for getting up each morning. She'd been the one who'd insisted they use part of their land to help others, turning a section of their ranch into a halfway house for women escaping domestic violence. After her death, Mike had closed the program, unable to bear the constant reminders of Emma's compassionate spirit and their shared dreams of making a difference. Now the ranch felt too big, too quiet, too empty. Mike had been going through the motions of daily life, maintaining the livestock and property out of habit rather than passion, wondering if he had the strength to keep going, or if it was time to sell everything and start over somewhere else. As he approached the main barn, the largest of the structures on his property, Mike noticed that the door was slightly ajar. He frowned, knowing he'd secured it earlier that evening, before the storm intensified. The wind was strong enough to rip doors off their hinges if they weren't properly latched. Mike pulled his flashlight from his jacket pocket and pushed the barn door open, stepping into the familiar space that housed his horses and equipment. The sound of the storm was muffled inside the large building, replaced by the quiet shifting and breathing of the animals seeking shelter from the weather. "Hello," Mike called out, his voice echoing in the dark space. "Anyone in here?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then Mike heard something that made his heart skip a soft gasp, the sound of someone trying to suppress their breathing. Someone was hiding in his barn. Mike raised his flashlight and began moving slowly through the barn, checking each stall and corner. As he rounded the feed storage area at the far end of the building, his light fell on a sight that stopped him in his tracks. Huddled behind a stack of hay bales was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, wearing clothes that were soaked through from the rain. Her long dark hair was matted and tangled, and her face was marked with bruises in various stages of healing. But it was her eyes that struck Mike most. They held the wild, desperate look of someone who'd been running for her life. "Please," she whispered, holding up her hands as if to ward off an attack. "Please don't hurt me. I'll leave, I promise. I just needed somewhere to get out of the storm." Mike immediately lowered his flashlight so it wouldn't shine directly in her face, and crouched down to appear less threatening. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" The woman studied his face in the dim light, clearly trying to determine whether he represented safety or danger. I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook with cold and fear. "This incredible story is just beginning, and you won't believe where it leads. Hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories that will restore your faith in humanity." "You're not fine," Mike said kindly. "You're soaking wet, you're hurt, and you're hiding in a stranger's barn in the middle of a storm. What's your name?" The woman hesitated for a long moment before answering. Rachel Martinez." "Well, Rachel, I'm Mike Carson, and this is my ranch. You're safe here, but we need to get you out of those wet clothes before you get hypothermia." Mike stood up slowly, being careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten her further. "There's a cabin about 100 yards from here, with heat, dry clothes, and food. Would you let me help you get there?" Rachel looked toward the barn door, where the storm continued to rage, then back at Mike. I can't go to a hospital or call the police. If they find me... Who's they?" Mike asked gently. "My husband," Rachel whispered, and the fear in her voice told Mike everything he needed to know. Mike had seen this before during the years when Emma ran the women's shelter program. The bruises, the terror, the desperate flight in the middle of the night, all signs of domestic violence that had escalated to the point where a woman feared for her life. "Rachel, how long have you been running?" 3 days, she replied, her teeth chattering from the cold. "I've been walking mostly, hiding during the day, trying to get as far away as possible. When the storm started, I saw your barn and thought maybe I could just wait it out." Mike's heart ached for this frightened young woman who was trying to survive in conditions that would challenge an experienced outdoorsman. "Rachel, I want you to listen to me carefully. You don't have to run any more tonight. You're safe here, and I'm going to help you. But first, we need to get you warm and dry. Why would you help me? Rachel asked, suspicion mixing with hope in her voice. You don't even know me. Mike was quiet for a moment, thinking about Emma and the countless women she'd helped over the years. Because someone should have helped you a long time ago, and because it's the right thing to do. Something in Mike's tone seemed to convince Rachel that he could be trusted. She allowed him to help her to her feet, though she moved carefully, as if she was injured in ways that weren't immediately visible. The walk to the guest cabin was treacherous in the storm, but Mike guided Rachel safely across the muddy ground, to the small building that Emma had used to house women during their first nights away from abusive situations. Mike hadn't entered the cabin since Emma's death, and opening the door brought back a flood of memories. There are clean clothes in the dresser, Mike said, turning on the heat and lighting the fireplace. Bathrooms through that door, if you want to take a hot shower. I'll go get some food from the main house. Wait, Rachel said, as Mike turned to leave. How do I know you're not? How do I know you won't? Lock the door behind me, Mike said simply. Don't open it, unless you hear my voice. If anything doesn't feel right, there's a phone by the bed. You can call 911. As Mike walked back to his house through the storm, he thought about the strange way life had brought this frightened woman to his door. For a year, he'd been questioning whether there was any purpose left in his existence without Emma. Now, suddenly, he was faced with someone who desperately needed the kind of help that Emma had devoted her life to providing. When Mike returned to the cabin an hour later, with food, medical supplies, and warm clothes, he found Rachel sitting by the fireplace, wearing an oversized sweater and jeans that belonged to Emma. Her hair was clean and brushed, and some of the desperate fear had left her eyes. Thank you, she said quietly, as Mike set down the bags he'd brought. I haven't felt safe in I can't remember how long. You want to tell me what happened? Mike asked, settling into a chair across from her. Rachel was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've been married to David for 3 years. At first, he was wonderful, charming, protective, successful. But after we got married, things changed. He became controlling, jealous, violent. She touched her face, where the bruises were still visible. This week he found out I'd been hiding money to try to leave him. He said he was going to kill me, and I believed him. Mike felt anger rise in his chest, the same protective instinct that had driven Emma to help so many women over the years. How did you get away? He was drinking heavily and passed out. I took what cash I had and ran. I've been walking for 3 days, sleeping in abandoned buildings, trying to get far enough away that he can't find me. Rachel looked up at Mike with eyes that held both gratitude and lingering terror. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found your barn. As Mike listened to Rachel's story, he realized that for the first time in a year, he felt a sense of purpose again. Emma might be gone, but her spirit of compassion lived on in the opportunity to help this woman who had literally stumbled into his life. But Mike also knew that helping Rachel wouldn't be simple. Abusive husbands didn't give up easily, and if David Martinez was determined to find his wife, it was only a matter of time before he tracked her to the Thunder Ridge Ranch. Facing the past over the next few days, as the storm passed and Rachel began to recover from her ordeal, Mike learned more about the woman who had sought refuge in his barn. Rachel was 26 years old, a former nurse who had given up her career when she married David Martinez, a successful businessman who owned several auto dealerships throughout Arizona. He convinced me I didn't need to work, Rachel explained, as she helped Mike with the morning chores, insisting on making herself useful, despite his protests that she should rest. He said he wanted to take care of me, that my job was to be a good wife. At first, it felt romantic. Later, I realized it was about control. Mike watched Rachel work with the horses, and was impressed by her natural gentleness and competence with the animals. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd grown up around livestock, and the horses responded to her with immediate trust. You've worked with horses before, Mike observed. I grew up on a small ranch in New Mexico, Rachel replied, stroking the neck of a mare named Bella. My father raised quarter horses before we lost the property to medical bills when my mother got sick. Is your family still in New Mexico? Rachel's expression darkened. My parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. I was completely alone when I met David. I think that's why I fell for his act. So completely, I was desperate for someone to care about me. Mike understood that isolation all too well. Since Emma's death, he'd experienced the same vulnerability. That came with having no family to rely on, no safety net of people who truly cared about your welfare. Rachel, Mike said carefully, we need to talk about what comes next. You can't keep running forever, and you can't hide here indefinitely. No, Rachel said quietly. But I'm scared. David has connections everywhere: police officers, judges, politicians. He's donated money to half the sheriff's departments in Arizona. Who's going to believe me over him? It was a frustration Mike had seen Emma deal with countless times. Wealthy, powerful abusers often had the resources and connections to manipulate the legal system, making it nearly impossible for their victims to find justice through traditional channels. There are people who specialize in helping women in your situation, Mike said. Legal advocates, safe houses, organizations that can help you disappear legally and start over with a new identity. I tried that before, Rachel replied, her voice heavy with defeat. David found me within a week. He has private investigators, security people, connections I don't even know about. Every time I think I'm safe, he tracks me down. Mike felt a familiar anger, rising, the same rage he'd felt watching Emma struggle against a system that too often failed the women who needed protection most. How many times have you tried to leave? This is the 4th time in 2 years, Rachel admitted. Each time, he finds me and brings me back. And each time, the punishment gets worse. That evening, as they sat on the porch of the guest cabin, watching the sunset paint the Arizona mountains in shades of orange and red, Rachel asked Mike about his life and how he'd come to own such a large ranch. My wife Emma and I built this place together, Mike said, his voice carrying the pain that still came with mentioning her name. She was a social worker who specialized in helping victims of domestic violence. We used part of the ranch as a safe house for women who needed somewhere to heal and plan their next steps. What happened to her? Rachel asked gently. Car accident last year. Drunk driver hit her on the mountain road coming back from town. Mike stared out at the horizon, where Emma used to love watching the sunset. I closed the shelter program after she died. Couldn't handle the constant reminders of what we'd built together. Rachel was quiet for a moment. She would have helped me, wouldn't she? Without question, Mike replied. Emma believed that everyone deserved to live without fear, and she was willing to fight anyone who tried to harm the women under her protection. I wish I could have met her. You would have liked each other, Mike said, with a sad smile. Emma always said that the strongest people were the ones who'd survived the worst situations and still found ways to help others. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle coming up the long gravel driveway to the ranch. Mike felt Rachel tense beside him as headlights swept across the property. It's okay, Mike said, recognizing the sheriff's department vehicle. That's Sheriff Tom Rodriguez. He's a good man. But as Sheriff Rodriguez got out of his car and approached the porch, Mike could see the serious expression on his face. Mike, Sheriff Rodriguez said, nodding politely to Rachel. Sorry to bother you folks this evening. I'm looking for a missing personnel woman named Rachel Martinez. Her husband reported her missing 3 days ago. Said she wandered off during some kind of mental health crisis. Mike felt Rachel go rigid beside him, but he kept his expression neutral. Haven't seen anyone by that name, Tom. Why? Is there some kind of danger to the community? Her husband seems to think she might be confused, possibly dangerous to herself, Sheriff Rodriguez replied. But something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by David Martinez's story. He's got private investigators combing the area, and he's offering a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return. Well, if I see anything suspicious, I'll give you a call, Mike said. After Sheriff Rodriguez left, Rachel broke down completely, the stress and fear finally overwhelming her composure. He's found me, she sobbed. David's already got the police believing I'm mentally unstable. That's what he always does, makes everyone think I'm crazy, so no one will believe me when I tell them what he's really like. Mike put a protective arm around Rachel's shoulders. Hey, Sheriff Rodriguez isn't convinced by your husband's story. I could tell by the way he was asking questions. He's been around long enough to recognize the signs of domestic abuse. But what if David comes here? What if he finds me? Mike looked at this brave woman who'd risked everything to escape an abusive marriage and made a decision that would change both their lives. Then he'll have to go through me first, Mike said firmly. You're under my protection now, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. For the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, Rachel smiled through her tears. Why are you doing this for me? You barely know me. Mike thought about Emma, about all the women she'd helped over the years, about the promise he'd made to continue her work even after she was gone. Because Emma would never forgive me if I turned away someone who needed help, Mike said. And because some things are more important than staying out of trouble. As they sat together on the porch, both of them understood that David Martinez wouldn't give up easily. The real test of Mike's commitment to protecting Rachel was yet to come. The confrontation 2 days later. Mike's worst fears were realized. When 3 black SUVs came racing up the gravel road to his ranch, kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. Mike had been expecting this moment, and he'd prepared for it as thoroughly as possible, including making some calls to contacts Emma had cultivated during her years of advocacy work. Mike watched from his porch as the vehicles stopped in front of his house, and 8 men got out. David Martinez, who Mike recognized from newspaper photos, 2 men who were clearly private investigators, and 5 others who had the look of hired security or off-duty police officers. David Martinez was exactly what Mike had expected, a handsome man in his 40s with expensive clothes and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way through wealth and intimidation. He approached Mike's porch with the swagger of a man who believed he owned whatever he wanted, including his wife. "Mr. Carson," David said, his voice carrying a false friendliness that barely concealed his arrogance. "I'm David Martinez. I believe you may have seen my wife, Rachel. She's been missing for several days, and we're very concerned about her mental health." Mike remained seated on his porch, deliberately projecting calm while scanning the faces of the men who'd accompanied Martinez. "Can't say I've seen anyone by that name. You might want to check with Sheriff Rodriguez. He was here asking the same questions." "Mr. Carson, my wife is mentally ill," Martinez continued, his tone becoming more aggressive. "She's dangerous to herself and possibly to others. If you're harboring her, you could be held liable for any harm that comes to her." "That's an interesting theory," Mike replied. "But since I haven't seen your wife, I guess we don't have a problem." One of the private investigators stepped forward. "Mr. Carson, we have reason to believe Mrs. Martinez is somewhere on your property. We'd like permission to search your buildings." "You got a warrant?" Mike asked. "We don't need a warrant," Martinez snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin. "My wife is mentally incompetent, and I have legal authority to retrieve her." Mike stood up slowly, his hand moving casually to rest on the rifle he'd leaning against the porch rail. "Mr. Martinez, this is private property. You and your friends need to leave." "Look, old man," Martinez said, his mask of civility finally slipping. "I know she's here. My investigators tracked her movements, and this is the only property in a 20-mile radius where she could have found shelter. I'm taking my wife home, one way or another, over my dead body," Mike said quietly. But his voice carried across the yard with unmistakable authority. The tension escalated rapidly as Martinez's security team spread out, clearly preparing to search the property, despite Mike's objections. That's when Rachel appeared from the guest cabin, walking toward the group with her head held high, despite the obvious fear in her eyes. "It's okay, Mike," she called out. "I'm here, David." Martinez's expression changed immediately when he saw his wife. The false concern was replaced by cold anger and possessive satisfaction. "Rachel, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with fake affection. "You've had us all so worried. It's time to come home so we can get you the help you need." "I don't need help," Rachel replied, stopping about 20 feet away from her husband. "I need to be free from you." "Honey, you're not thinking clearly," Martinez said, taking a step toward her. "You're sick, remember? That's why you ran away. But it's okay. Forgive you." "I'm not sick, David," Rachel said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm not crazy. I'm a woman who is being beaten and terrorized by her husband, and I finally found the courage to leave." Martinez's facade cracked completely. "You're my wife," he snarled. "You belong to me, and you're coming home whether you want to or not." "Actually," said a new voice, "she's not going anywhere." Everyone turned to see Sheriff Rodriguez approaching with 2 deputy sheriffs, all of them armed and looking very serious. "Tom," Mike said with relief. "Glad you could make it." "Got your message," Sheriff Rodriguez replied, his eyes never leaving Martinez and his men. "Interesting timing, too. We just received some very enlightening information about Mr. Martinez from the FBI." Martinez's confident expression faltered. "Sheriff, I don't know what kind of lies my wife has been telling, but this isn't about your wife," Sheriff Rodriguez interrupted. "This is about the federal investigation into your business practices. Money laundering, tax evasion, connections to organized crime. The FBI asked us to keep an eye on you." Mike felt a surge of satisfaction. The calls he'd made to Emma's contacts had paid off. One of her former colleagues now worked with a federal task force investigating domestic violence cases involving wealthy and powerful abusers. And Rachel's situation had triggered a broader investigation into Martinez's activities. "You can't prove anything," Martinez said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Maybe not yet," Sheriff Rodriguez replied, "but we can certainly investigate allegations of domestic violence, stalking, and harassment." "Mrs. Martinez, are you here voluntarily?" "Yes," Rachel said firmly. "Mr. Carson gave me shelter when I was fleeing from my abusive husband. I'm here because I choose to be here." "And Mr. Carson," Sheriff Rodriguez continued, "are you willing to provide temporary sanctuary for Mrs. Martinez while we investigate her claims?" "Absolutely," Mike replied. Martinez's face darkened with rage. "This is harassment. I have rights. That woman is my wife." "Mr. Martinez," Sheriff Rodriguez said calmly, "in Arizona, marriage doesn't give you the right to abuse, threaten, or stalk your spouse. Mrs. Martinez has the right to live wherever she chooses. And if she chooses to stay here, that's her decision." One of Martinez's security men whispered something in his ear, and Mike could see the businessman calculating his options. He was clearly accustomed to using wealth and intimidation to get his way, but he was discovering that neither would work in this situation. "This isn't over," Martinez said finally, his voice full of menace. "Rachel, you'll come back to me eventually. You always do." "Not this time," Rachel replied with quiet dignity. "I'm done being afraid of you." As Martinez and his entourage retreated to their vehicles, Sheriff Rodriguez approached Mike and Rachel. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask you some questions about your husband's activities," he said. "The FBI is very interested in your testimony." "I'll tell you everything I know," Rachel said. "David's been involved in things that go way beyond domestic violence, money laundering, intimidation, possibly worse. I kept quiet because I was afraid, but I'm not afraid anymore." Mike watched with pride as Rachel stood up to the man who had terrorized her for years. In finding the courage to leave her abuser, she was also helping to expose his criminal activities and protect other potential victims. "Mike," Sheriff Rodriguez said, "you sure you're ready for what this means? Martinez isn't going to give up easily, and he's got resources." Mike looked at Rachel, then at the guest cabin where Emma had helped so many women find the strength to rebuild their lives. "Tom, my wife spent years fighting for women like Rachel. I'm not about to stop now." New beginnings 6 months after Rachel's dramatic confrontation with her abusive husband. The Thunder Ridge Ranch was bustling with activity as Mike and Rachel prepared for the grand reopening of Emma's women's shelter program. The FBI investigation had resulted in David Martinez's arrest on multiple federal charges, and Rachel's testimony had been instrumental in securing his conviction. "I still can't believe it's really over," Rachel said as she organized files in what had once been Emma's office. "For so long, I thought I'd never be free of him." Mike looked up from the schedule he was reviewing for the new arrivals. "Expected that week." "It's over, Rachel. Martinez is going to be in federal prison for a long time, and even when he gets out, he'll be under so many restrictions that he won't be able to hurt you or anyone else." The transformation of both Rachel and the ranch over the past 6 months had been remarkable. Rachel had not only recovered from her physical and emotional trauma, but had thrown herself into helping Mike resurrect the shelter program with a passion that reminded him constantly of Emma's dedication. "Mike," Rachel said, setting down her paperwork and looking at him seriously, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "What's that?" "Are you doing all this because you care about me, or because you think it's what Emma would have wanted?" Mike considered the question carefully. Over the past months, his feelings for Rachel had evolved from protective concern to something deeper and more complex. She was intelligent, compassionate, brave, and beautiful. But he'd been hesitant to acknowledge his growing love for her, unsure whether it was fair to either of them given the circumstances of how they'd met. At first, it was about Emma, Mike admitted. Helping you felt like honoring her memory, continuing the work she'd started. But somewhere along the way, it became about you, about us. Rachel crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "Mike, I need you to know that I care about you too. More than I thought I could ever care about anyone again. But I also need to know that you're not with me because you see me as some kind of project, or because you feel sorry for me. Rachel, you're the strongest, most courageous person I've ever met," Mike said, looking into her eyes. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with pity and everything to do with admiration, respect, and love." "Love?" Rachel asked softly. "Love," Mike confirmed. I love you, Rachel Martinez. Not as a victim I rescued, not as a way to honor Emma's memory, but as the amazing woman you are. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she reached up to touch Mike's face. I love you too, Mike Carson. You saved my life in every way that matters. As they held each other in Emma's old office, both of them understood that their relationship had grown from tragedy and trauma into something beautiful and healing. They'd found in each other not just romantic love, but the shared purpose that came from dedicating their lives to helping others. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Patricia Morales, the psychologist who'd been working with the shelter program to provide counseling services for the women who sought refuge there. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Morales said with a knowing smile, but our first new resident is here. Mike and Rachel walked out to the main yard to welcome Maria Santos, a young mother with 2 small children, who had fled an abusive situation in Phoenix. As they helped Maria and her kids settle into the guest cabin that had once housed Rachel, Mike was struck by the circle of healing that was taking place. Mrs. Santos, Rachel said gently, I know you're scared right now, but you're safe here. Mr. Carson and I are going to make sure you have everything you need to build a new life for yourself and your children. How do you know? Maria asked, her voice carrying the same desperate hope that Mike had heard in Rachel's voice that first night. Because I was where you are 6 months ago, Rachel replied. I was hiding in Mr. Carson's barn, terrified and convinced I'd never be free. Now look at I'm safe, I'm strong, and I'm helping other women find their way to freedom. Over the following weeks, the Thunder Ridge Ranch became home to 6 women and their children, all of them survivors of domestic violence who were working to rebuild their lives with the support of Mike, Rachel, and a growing network of volunteers and professionals. The program was different from the traditional shelter model. Instead of temporary housing, Mike and Rachel offered long-term sanctuary, job training, counseling, and the kind of comprehensive support that allowed women to truly start over, rather than just survive from day to day. The key, Rachel explained, to a group of social workers who'd come to study their methods, is treating survivors as whole people with unlimited potential, not as victims who need to be managed. When you give women the tools and support they need, there's no limit to what they can accomplish. The success stories were remarkable. Maria Santos had enrolled in nursing school and was working toward financial independence. Another resident, Jennifer Park, had started a small business making and selling organic soaps. A third woman, Sarah Thompson, was preparing to take the bar exam after completing her law degree online. You know what Emma would say about all this? Mike said one evening, as he and Rachel watched the children play in the yard while their mothers attended a support group meeting. What would she say? She'd say that sometimes the most broken people become the strongest healers, and that love multiplies when you share it instead of hoarding it. Rachel smiled, understanding that Mike was talking about both the women they were helping and their own journey from trauma to healing to love. 1 year after Rachel had first sought shelter in Mike's barn, they stood together on the same porch where they'd first talked about the future, but now they were planning a wedding and discussing the expansion of their program to help even more women. Mike, Rachel said, watching the sunset paint the Arizona mountains in brilliant colors. Do you ever think about that night when you found me hiding in your barn? Every day, Mike replied. It was the night my life started over. Mine too, Rachel said. I was running from death and found life instead. Found you, found purpose, found hope, found love, Mike added, pulling her close. Found love, Rachel agreed. As they held each other in the gathering twilight, both of them understood that their story was just beginning. The scared woman who'd hidden in a barn and the grieving widower who'd lost his way had found in each other not just healing and love, but a shared mission that honored both Emma's legacy and their own commitment to making the world a little safer for those who had nowhere else to turn. The Thunder Ridge Ranch had become more than a shelter. It was a testament to the power of compassion, the possibility of healing, and the truth that sometimes the most beautiful love stories grow from the darkest moments. When one person's courage to help and another person's courage to trust create something stronger than either could have imagined alone. If this powerful story about courage, healing, and unexpected love moved your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories about people who risk everything to protect others. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that even in our darkest moments, hope and love can find us. Comment below and tell us about a time when someone's kindness changed your life. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest inspiring stories about the power of compassion. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most broken places. This remarkable story reminds us that healing happens when broken people choose to help each other instead of staying isolated in their pain. Mike's decision to help Rachel, despite his own grief, and Rachel's transformation from victim to advocate, show us that love and purpose often emerge from our willingness to be vulnerable and generous even when we're hurting. Their story continues to inspire domestic violence survivors across the country, proving that escape is possible, healing is real, and love can bloom even after the worst trauma. The Thunder Ridge Ranch stands as a beacon of hope for women who need to know that there are people willing to fight for their safety and freedom, and that a new life is always possible for those brave enough to reach for it.